Уважаемые участники и гости форума, я рад снова приветствовать вас в зале «Москва». Напоминаю, что следующая лекция пройдет на английском языке, и для вашего удобства мы подготовили устройство синхронного перевода, которое вы можете получить по своему бейджику на входе в зал «Москва». А прямо сейчас мы готовимся обсудить вопросы долголетия с человеком, который много лет наблюдал за долгожителями по всему миру. Дорогие друзья, впервые в России Дэн Бютнер. Внимание на экран!
Дэн Бютнер, известный американский путешественник и писатель, исследовал голубые зоны Земли в рамках проекта National Geographic. В ходе исследования ученые знакомились и общались с людьми, живущими дольше других в мире. Выяснилось, что жители голубых зон гораздо реже подвержены серьезным заболеваниям и чаще других доживают до 100 лет. Исследовав историю, традицию, культуру и быт долгожителей, Дэн Бютнер готов объяснить, почему эти люди живут дольше, что они едят, сколько спят, какие выполняют упражнения. Существует ли рецепт долголетия? Можно ли действительно вычислить закономерности, благодаря которым люди живут больше 100 лет? Дэн Бютнер считает, что да. И каждый человек может создать собственную зону долголетия. На основе своих исследований он выделил 9 основных жизненных принципов, которые помогут прожить долгую и, самое главное, активную, продуктивную и счастливую жизнь. Сегодня на 3-м форуме социальных инноваций регионов Дэн Бютнер с лекцией «Голубые зоны. Как повернуть биологические часы вспять».
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Mr. Dan Butner. Hello, Mr. Butner.
Thank you.
Welcome to Moscow. I know that it's your first time in Russia, in Moscow.
I'm afraid it's my second time in Moscow, but so far it's my favorite city in the entire country.
Really? Thank you. Thank you for that. And how do you feel today? What do you think about this forum, about the atmosphere? Have you already visited some maybe exhibitions here?
You know, I wrote a cover story for National Geographic on the happiest places in the world, and I can tell you there's no place on earth where happiness just happens spontaneously. There's always a genesis. There's always a group of enlightened leaders who come together and focus on better quality of life, and this is a perfect example of it.
So great. And then I think it's the best time to give you the floor and start the most interesting part of your performance. Дорогие друзья, поприветствуйте Дэн Бютнер. Мы начинаем выступление Дэна Бютнера.
Thank you. What a blast. Okay, we're going to have some fun. I'm going to talk about the world's longest lived people and the lessons they teach us, not only as individuals, but also as communities, as cities and employers. But first, I want to start with you. I'm a big believer that if you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So I thought we'd start out today by measuring each and every one of yours life expectancy. So I'm going to figure out how long you're going to live, and in order for me to do that, I need to ask you 8 questions, and your job is, number 1, raise your hand when the question pertains to you, and number 2, remember how many times you raise your hand. So you ready? The questions start easy and then they get hard. First question, raise your hand if you sleep at least 8 hours most nights of the week. At least 8 hours most nights of the week. All right, you guys were up late last night. Okay. Second question, raise your hand if you move at least 45 minutes every day. And that could be in the gym working out, it could be doing yoga, it could be walking around Moscow. Okay, I'd say the majority of you. Raise your hand if you eat at least 3 honest servings of vegetables every day. And ketchup and French fries do not count. 3 honest servings of vegetables. Okay, I'd say about a third of you. Raise your hand if you have not, and I emphasize have not had unprotected sex with a stranger. I like you guys already. I said not. By the way, these are real questions. Okay, raise your hand if you have at least 3 friends who fulfill the following criteria. Number 1, you can have a meaningful conversation with them. Number two, you can call them on a bad day and they'll care. And number three, you actually like them. Okay, I'd say the majority. I know there's a little lag for the translation, but the majority of you. Sixth question. Raise your hand if you belong to a faith. Could be Christianity, Muslim, Jewish, it doesn't matter. But raise your hand if you belong to a faith. And keep your hand up if you show up to church at least 4 times per month. 4 times per month. Okay, well, 0 hands. Okay, well, no, there's 2 hands, 3 hands. Okay. Raise your hand if you have not smoked in the last 5 years. Not smoked in the last 5 years. Oh, better than average. And final question, raise your hand if you believe you have the health and the desire to live to be at least age 90. Health and desire to live to be at least age 90. All right, most of you. Actually, that is the best predictor. That's the most powerful of all 8 questions I've asked you. But since I had a chance to ask all 8 questions, I can get a pretty good idea of how long you're going to live. And this assumes an average age of 40. And looking around, I can tell you guys are much younger than that. But I can get within about a 10% margin of error. So if you raised your hand twice, and you're a man, life expectancy 68, and if you're a woman, it's 72. If you raised your hand 5 times and you're a man, life expectancy 78, and if you're a woman, it's 82. And if you raised your hand at least 7 times and you're a man, life expectancy is 81, and if you're a woman, it's 87. Did anybody raise their hand all 8 times? Anybody raise their hand all 8 times? Alexander, would you stand up? Ma'am, would you stand up, please? Can you stand up? Yes, stand up. Could we give these a big Moscow round of applause? They are our healthiest members. You 3 are dismissed to the cocktail lounge. We have special cocktails for you. The rest of you, I have something to say. So, as I said, I'm going to take you on a journey to the world's longest lived people, but to establish my credibility as an explorer and also as somebody familiar with Russia, I want to just tell you a very quick part of my history. 29 years ago, right now, as part of a team of 2 Soviets and 2 Americans, we bicycled around the world. We started in my home in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We bicycled across the United States in a snowstorm, made our way through Europe. Then we continued on through into the then Soviet Union. I don't think this clicker's working. There we go, into the former Soviet Union. We didn't go through Moscow. We actually started at Odessa, continued on through Volgograd, Ufa, into the Ural Mountains, continued on into Siberia, to Novosibirsk, continued on to Irkutsk. After that, in about Chita, we started to lose the road altogether. We had a month where we lived in mud. But we eventually bicycled all the way to Vladivostok in a period of 4 months. My team members included Alexander Razumenko and Volodya Kovalenko, who live in Siberia, and my brother and I. And for 4 months here, I had the wonderful opportunity of sleeping in small villages and eating in stolovas and receiving the wonderful hospitality of people here in what was called the Soviet Union then. We were there in the very last year of the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union collapsed the very next year. I'd like to say it wasn't my fault. But when we made it around the world, there was a great celebration, the idea that 2 Soviet Siberians and 2 Americans could cooperate to circle the entire globe. It was a big source of pride and a great training for me, and it eventually got me into National Geographic, where for the past 15 years I've been leading expeditions, mostly scientific expeditions. And in the year 2004, I had an idea to, in a sense, reverse engineer longevity. So research shows that only about 20% of how long you live is dictated by your genes. The other 80% is lifestyle and environment. So based on that assumption, we worked with demographers to identify the statistically longest lived parts of the world. These are places that have the highest rate of centenarians or the longest life expectancy. So these places, and by the way, it took us 3 years to find these places. These places are the places that have achieved the outcomes we want. They lived a long time, they avoided chronic disease, and then they died quickly, often in their sleep, and occasionally, I happen to know, after sex. Once we identified these places, then we put together a second team of experts who could help us go to each of these places to identify the common denominators or the correlations. What are you seeing no matter where you go in the world and you see extraordinary longevity? And remarkably, no matter where you go and see long-lived people, you see the same 9 common denominators, and I'm going to tell you what those 9 things are. But first, because I have the advantage of National Geographic photography, I thought I would quickly take you to each of these blue zones to give you a feel for what it's like to live there. So we found our first blue zone about 200 kilometers off the coast of Italy on the island of Sardinia. Sardinia is in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. It's an island, about 1.4 million people live there. But up in the highlands, a cluster of just 6 villages, about 60,000 people, you have the highest concentration of male centenarians in the world. About 11 times more male centenarians than you would see any place else in Europe. And this is a place where men are not only making it to 100, but still chopping wood at 106 and beating a guy 60 years younger than him in an arm wrestle. And this, by the way, took place at 7 in the morning after this 106-year-old man had a tumbler of red wine. So our team went to try to find the common denominators, and it turns out there's a researcher we work with named Gianni Pez, who has surveyed more than 300 centenarians, male centenarians, to find out exactly what they've done over the course of their life. And it turns out there are 3 biggest predictors of reaching age 100 in Sardinia. Number 3 is your barley consumption. It turns out that there's something in barley. The barley is used in breads, and it's used to make sort of a porridge. But the guys who eat the most porridge were living the longest. The second biggest predictor was the number of daughters they had. And it turns out the men, the guys most likely to reach age 100 had 5 or more daughters. Now, we don't know if that's because daughters tend to take care of their aging fathers, or if it's because if you can survive 5 adolescent girls, making it to 100 is no problem. But the biggest predictor of making to age 100 is your profession. And it turns out the farmers in Sardinia were living no longer than the rest of the Italian population. It was only the shepherds that were living a long time. The shepherds are these men who spend long days basically following their sheep in the mountains. They don't work all that hard. They sort of wake up late when the sun's warm. They spend a couple hours with their animals. At noon, they have lunch. They take a little nap. After their nap, they're back in their village. A little bit more time with their animals. They're back in their village by 5 o'clock. They developed a special diet that they could carry into the fields, a type of bread made out of unleavened wheat, called carta de musica, which means sheet music, because if you hold it up to the light, it looks like sheet music. a type of cheese made from sheep's milk. It's called pecorino, very high in omega-3 fatty acids. This is a grass-fed sheep's milk. A type of wine called Cannonau. In Sardinia, you get a very red grape, and it turns out that most of the artery-scrubbing antioxidants in wine are found in the pigment. And because the sun is so intense in Sardinia, the grapes get very red, and the result is a very rich red wine, often made at home. Nothing like dirty boots to add terroir and flavor. But this is a wine that's consumed throughout the day, small doses, not big doses, maybe the equivalent of 2 or 3 glasses. When they're at home, their diet consists of a variation of the Mediterranean diet, a lot of fava beans. They do eat meat, but meat is a celebratory food. They eat meat only about 5 times per month, and that meat is almost always pork, never beef, very little chicken, a little bit of eggs, no cow's dairy though. But more important than what they eat and what they drink is other cultural characteristics. For example, here, because they were isolated, they depend more on the community and the family than other villages in Sardinia. Almost a fanatic zeal for the family. This is a difficult part of Sardinia. It's in the highlands. They were attacked by the Romans, the Phoenicians, the Arabs, and they had to develop a certain toughness and a certain camaraderie that survives to this day. Like other blue zones in the world, they celebrate age. In Sardinia, the older you get, the more valuable you are to the community. So you see 80 and 90-year-olds who are still advising the mayor, or they're doing city patrols. They always live in the home. This is very different than I think what you see here in Russia. In Sardinia, they would never put an aging parent in a retirement home because that would shame the family. Instead, aging mom and dad, the grandparents stay at home where they're put to work. They take care of the children, they help with the cooking, they help with the chores. They're expected to stay active, not recipients of health care, the way that most sort of aging programs are. We think of older people, of people we're going to take care of and develop programs. It's actually the reverse in Sardinia. There, the communities expect to harness the wisdom that comes from 70, 80, 90, or 100 years of life. Not only in the agricultural practices, but also in the kitchen. A lot of these recipes for longevities are held by the grandmother. And indeed, something called the grandmother effect has shown that in families that keep a grandparent nearby, the children in those families have lower rates of disease, lower rates of mortality, and they do better in school. So it's this beautiful, virtuous circle of keeping aging parents nearby in favor of their longevity and favor the health of kids. On the other side of the planet, 800 miles, 1,200 kilometers south of Tokyo and the island of Okinawa, we found the longest-lived women in the world. Here you have about 30 times more female centenarians than you would expect to see in Russia. This is the longest-lived population in the history of the world. They not only live a long time, they have the world's disability-free life expectancy, so they live a long time, avoid diseases, 7 years longer than the average American, 5 times as many centenarians, about 1/5 the rate of heart disease, and about 1/6 the rate of cancers that foreshorten most lives in the developed world. So they have what we want. How do they do it? Well, first of all, they have an interesting diet. Does anybody want to take a guess at what the most prominent food in the centenarian diet was in Okinawa? Go ahead, just shout it out. Rice, beans, fish. What is it? Fish, seaweed. It was kind of a trick question because very few people know this. It's actually sweet potatoes, a type of purple sweet potatoes. that composed about 60% of the Okinawan diet until 1960. Why sweet potatoes? Because sweet potatoes could endure the typhoons that came through Okinawa 3 times a year. All other crops are wiped out. The tofu, the sweet potatoes, because they are grown underground, they're tubers, they survive, but they're also a very good source of complex carbohydrates, protein, and other nutrients. They also eat about 6 times more tofu than we do in the United States. I know tofu is not really big here in Russia. It's not something anyway I saw when I bicycled across. But once again, more important than their diet or exercise were their social constructs. You know, I asked you that question, do you have 3 good friends you can count on a bad day? That's the question that is used to diagnose loneliness. If you're lonely, if you're an older person living in some apartment and you don't have good social connectivity friends, that cuts about 8 years off of your life expectancy. It's overlooked as an intervention to help people live longer. So where I come from in the United States, there's no guarantee we're going to have friends. If we want friends in America, you have to work for it. You have to make an effort. But in Okinawa, as children, parents match you up with 4 or 5 other children. You're about 5 years old, and you're expected to travel through life with those kids. And when things go well, you get a raise, there's a good harvest, you're expected to share the rewards. On the other hand, if things go wrong, and they always do in our lives, parent gets sick, you get a divorce, child does poorly in school and needs help, you always have this circle of friends who are behind you to help you financially or help you psychologically in times of difficulty. The reason I show this picture right here is these 5 girls have belonged to the same social circle for 97 years. Their average age is 102. They still get together every night. They gossip. They drink sake. They argue about who that hot guy liked best back in 1941. But they still support each other. They still argue about who makes the best tofu dish as well. But here, you know, in the United States, unless you have a nurse or some really high-priced insurance plan, there's no guarantee you're going to have social support. In Okinawa, it comes with the culture. Also interesting about Okinawa, there's no word for retirement. Retirement, by the way, is a completely invented concept. It was invented by the Germans during the time of the Kaiser. It's this artificial punctuation between your useful life and your life of repose. So in Okinawa, one word imbues their entire adult life. That word is ikigai, and it roughly means purpose, the reason for which I wake up in the morning, and it imbues their life until their 80s, 90s, and even 100. For this 102-year-old, his ikigai, his sense of purpose, was continuing to teach martial arts. For this 97-year-old fisherman, he no longer fishes for profit, but every day he gets out of bed, out of the easy chair. He doesn't need to go to the gym. He doesn't need any special government program, but he goes out and he puts on his bamboo goggles, his rubber suit, and he spears fish, and he brings it home for his children and his children's children for lunch. That also gets him an invitation to connect with his family. And here's another guy who at 97 years old could beat me in an arm wrestle. And then finally, Kamada-san here. This is a 102-year-old spiritual leader. Okinawa is one of the few places in the world where women are spiritual leaders. Her ikigai, though, was her great-great-great-granddaughter. These 2 girls are separated in age by 101 and a half years. And when I asked her what it felt like to hold a descendant more than a century younger than her, she said, "It feels like leaping into heaven," which for me, it actually made me look forward to getting old. So then my editor at National Geographic said, "Dan, you have to find the blue zone in America. And I looked for a while on the prairies of Minnesota where I'm from, and there's lots of old farm villages with a lot of 100-year-olds, and we discovered the reason for that is because all the young people leave and go south or to the big cities. So it's a sort of artificial demographic. But we found America's blue zone in a very unusual place. About 120 miles south of Los Angeles, you go down this 6-lane freeway, you get off the freeway, and the first thing you see are 2 junk food restaurants. And I'm thinking to myself, this is a blue zone? But what happens here in Loma Linda, California, you have the highest percentage of Seventh-day Adventists in the world. Adventists are conservative Christians who evangelize with health, but they also celebrate their Sabbath, not on Sunday, but on Saturday. So they take this Sabbath very seriously. So there's actually very interesting statistics here. So in America anyway, and Russia, it's different, but life expectancy for women in America is 80, but for Adventist women, they're living 9 years longer, and for men, the difference is even more remarkable. Adventist men live 11 years longer than their North American counterpart. And you say, why is this? I mean, they live in the same environment as the rest of Americans do. If you look at an Adventist congregation, you see the same ethnic composition. You see people of European extraction, African Americans, Asian, Hispanics. What's going on here? How do you explain 10 extra years of life expectancy? Well, there's a few things going on. First of all, they take this Sabbath very seriously. We've heard a lot about stress at this conference. Stress in the workplace. Jennifer, who just preceded me, talked about how stress erodes happiness in the workplace, stress at home, stress in our lives. The Adventists take their Sabbath day very seriously. From sunset on Friday until sunset on Saturday, no matter how busy they are, no matter what work is telling them to do, no matter where the children need to be driven, they stop everything. And just for 24 hours, they call it a sanctuary in time. Friday night, they have dinner with their family. Saturday morning, they have their church services. Saturday at lunch, they get together and they have potluck lunches. They share a big meal together. And then Saturday afternoon, hardwired right in their scriptures, their holy book prescribes a nature walk. Every single Sunday afternoon, the definition of which has evolved. But this is something they're doing not just for a couple weeks or month when they're excited about the running a marathon or whatever's the wellness program at work. They do this for decades or a lifetime. Every Saturday, they're getting their physical activity. They take their diet directly from the Bible. I'm not a big Bible reader myself, but I read the Bible for this story. And if you open up to the very first book of the Bible, Genesis chapter 1, verse 26, God actually prescribes very clearly the diet for the Garden of Eden. She prescribes every plant that bears seed, so that means nuts and beans and grains, and every tree that bears fruit. And the Adventists actually take this seriously. Most Adventists are vegetarians or vegans. They follow this edict of the church. We also now know that health behaviors are as contagious as catching a cold. And because in Adventists, because they have this sort of unusual calendar and religious beliefs, Adventists tend to associate with other Adventists. So the contagions that circulate through Adventist networks tend to be positive. They get together around plant-based food. They don't smoke. They don't drink very much. They support each other spiritually. They take walks together. So it's this spiritual, this connection, this contagion of the right people around them that is explaining the longevity of their behaviors. Not habits, not behavioral change. Their social circle is keeping it going. This is a culture that has yielded Ellsworth Wareham. Ellsworth Wareham is, when I met him, was 94 years old, multimillionaire. He had all the money he needed, yet when a contractor, a construction company, wanted $6,000 to build a privacy fence, he's like, well, for that kind of money, I'll do it myself. And for the next 3 days, it was about 90 degrees. He was out shoveling cement, hauling timbers, and on the 4th day, predictably perhaps, he ends up in the operating room. But this isn't Ellsworth getting heart surgery. This is Ellsworth doing heart surgery. Continued to do heart surgery 20 times per month until he was age 97. Today he's 103. Another great example, Ed Rawlings. Ed Rawlings, 106 years old, a working cowboy. He has his pilot's license. He starts his day with a swim, and on the weekends, he likes to water ski. This is where you want to be when you're 106. And then my favorite, Marge Jeton. Marge, 105 years old, wakes up every morning at 5:30 in the morning. She reads her Bible, she has her breakfast, and she's very precise about her breakfast. Slow cook oatmeal, nuts, dates, topped with soy milk, and followed by a prune juice shooter. Prune juice is something to help you go to the bathroom. And then she goes down and she lifts weights. She rides her bicycle. She gets in her Cadillac. Remember, she's 105 years old and barrels down the San Bernardino Freeway, where she continues to volunteer for 6 different organizations, including the Loma Linda Senior Center, where she goes out to help out the old folks. They're about 60. She's 105. You guys don't know this about me, but I've actually led 17 very difficult and arduous expeditions. I crossed the Sahara Desert, crossed all of South America, but I can honestly tell you I've never been on an expedition more dangerous than riding in the front seat with Marge Jeton. As she pointed out, a stranger is a friend I haven't met with, but the type of people inspire you. So I wrote this cover story for National Geographic. It was the most successful cover story in National Geographic's history, one of 3. I wrote the book called Blue Zones. And for the first time, by now I'm 40 years old. I never had any money in my whole life. And all of a sudden I write this big book that sells 3 million copies, and I have money. And the first thing I did with that money is spent it on doing more exploration. I went out and I hired the demographers that I've met doing this story to go out and find more blue zones. I found a 4th blue zone in the Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica, a very remote part of the world. And what's extraordinary about this place is they have the lowest rate of middle-aged mortality. What does that mean? That means if you're a 40-year-old, you have the best chance of reaching a healthy age 92. So the maximum average life expectancy in the first world is 93 or 94. So if somebody tells you they're going to help you live to 100, you can be pretty sure they're trying to steal from you. To reach age 100 in the world right now, in the first world, you not only have to do the right things, you have to have won the genetic lottery. But for people living in Russia, if you do everything right, you should be able to reach 92 or 93. That's sort of the upward limit. These people are doing it better than anybody else in the world. How do they do it? Well, diet is an interesting answer in Costa Rica. They have invented, I would argue, the best diet that humans have invented in all of history. And it's only 3 foods. Those 3 foods are corn, whole grain corn, which is ground up into tortillas. They're absolutely delicious. Squash in its variety of forms, and beans. And when you combine corn, squash, and beans, you have complex carbohydrates. You have all the amino acids necessary for human sustenance. In other words, provides all the protein that you need. It has trace minerals. You can more or less survive off of these three foods, and this is about 80% of the Nicoyan diet or the Costa Rican diet. They too are also religious, they connect socially, and they live in an environment where they're nudged into movement all the time. Costa Rica provides a very important example for places like the United States and Russia. At least in my country, the general belief is you have to be rich to be healthy. And in fact, indeed, in the United States, the richer the people are, the longer they live. But in Costa Rica, it's the opposite. In Costa Rica, the poorest people are living the longest. They have the longest telomeres. Telomeres are sort of caps at the end of your DNA that when your cells divide, they get chopped off. So the longer your telomeres, the healthier you are, the younger you are biologically. It's the poorest people in Costa Rica that have the longest telomeres. And then finally, and this is the last blue zone, in the island of Icaria, Greece, they have, this is about 25 kilometers off the coast of Turkey, an isolated island. It was largely overlooked by Western civilization. It was largely overlooked because they had no natural harbors, so there was no place for boats to weigh anchor. And they developed their own special culture over the time. They have the purest form of the Mediterranean diet. Like other blue zones, they grow their own food. Gardening is a very important aspect of the Icarian way of life. By the way, I happen to know from having bicycled across Russia that dachas are very popular, at least in the rural parts of Russia. I would say in every blue zones, people have their own form of dacha, and I would say that dachas are probably one of the most important secrets that Russia has for longevity. But I like to tell the story of this man right here. His name is Stamatis Moriaitis, lived in Icaria. As a young man, he moves to America, gets a job as a painter, makes money, buys a house in the suburbs, big house, a big car, marries a Greek-American woman. But at age 66, he finds himself short of breath. He goes to 3 doctors. They all say the same thing. You have terminal lung cancer. You will be dead in 6 months. So instead of dying in Detroit, he flies his wife back to Icaria. They move in with his 80-year-old parents. He starts eating the Icarian diet, breathing the air, drinking the wine. He reconnects with his religion. He reconnects with his friends. 6 months comes and goes. He's not dead. He feels pretty good. So he goes out in his yard and he plants a vineyard. And he thinks to himself, I'm not going to live to see this vineyard, but my wife will. And when my wife harvests these grapes, she'll think of me and she'll remember me. Well, to make a long story medium, 34 years later, when I met him at age 102, he was harvesting all of those grapes, making 200 liters of wine every year and drinking it all. So, of course, I asked him what his secret to longevity was, and I was pretty sure it was not his ability to match plaids. And he just said, after a minute, I don't know, I guess I just forgot to die. And this seems like a silly answer, but actually it is the most accurate answer of all the blue zones for explaining longevity. No matter where you go in the world and you see long-lived people making it to their 80s and 90s and still water skiing or playing or teaching karate, it's not because they tried. They didn't do any of the things that we think about when we think of gaining health. They didn't exercise, at least not in the way we exercise. They didn't get on a diet. They didn't start taking supplements. They didn't join a wellness program. They didn't have an app on their phone to teach them how to get enough steps. They just lived their life. Because when it comes to longevity, at least in places that really achieve it, it's not because health is something that is successfully pursued. It successfully ensues. And the big insight here is that longevity comes not from changing behavior, not from changing habits. It comes from creating the right environment. An environment where the healthy choice is the easy choice. No matter where you go in the world and you see long-lived people, they're not exercising, but they're moving every 20 minutes. They live in places where every time they go to work, every time they go to school, kids go to school, every time they go out to eat, it occasions a walk. They don't have a button to push for yard work and another button to push for housework and another button to push for kitchen work. They're grinding their corn by hand or kneading their bread. They're making homemade bread. They do their own yard work. My team calculated that they're nudged into movement every 20 minutes or so. None of this idea of sitting at your office desk for 8 hours or on your couch and then expecting to make it up at the gym. That's not how we evolved as a species. They worry about the same things we worry about. You think if you go to Sardinia or Icaria, people don't have stress. They have the same stresses that we do. They worry about their children. They worry about their health. They worry about their finances. But what they have that we're losing are sacred daily traditions, rituals. The Adventists pray. Slow down before every meal and say a prayer. The Costa Ricans and the Icarians take a nap. The Okinawans have ancestor veneration. They remember their ancestors, where they came from, and they relinquish their day to their ancestors watching over them. The Sardinians, they just do happy hour, which is a practice I've adopted. They have vocabulary for purpose. Remember Okinawa Ikigai? In Costa Rica, it's Plan de Vida, but it's very clear at the top of their head why they wake up in the morning. That's worth about 7 extra years of life expectancy as opposed to being rudderless in life. Very important. When it comes to what they eat, they do drink a little bit, a couple glasses of wine, and no, you cannot save up all week long and have 14 on the weekend. I wrote another book that looked at all of the diets in all 5 blue zones over the last 100 years. If you want to know what a 100-year-old ate to live to be 100, you can't just ask them, what have you been eating lately? Because they don't remember. If I asked you what you had for lunch last Tuesday, you probably couldn't tell me. So you can't ask a centenarian, what have you been eating? So we found dietary surveys done over the last 100 years, 155 dietary surveys, so we know what people were eating when they were children, and when they were young parents, and when they were 50, and when they were newly retired. We did a big meta-analysis or average. Here is what centenarians eat to live to be 100. 90 to 100% low-processed plant-based food. Very high carbohydrate diets. You can forget paleo or forget keto. They're eating complex carbohydrates. What do I mean by that? Grains, whole grains, greens, nuts, and beans. If you're eating about a cup of beans a day, it's probably worth 4 extra years of life expectancy over eating meat or cheese. They do eat meat, but only 5 times per month on the average. A lot less fish than you probably think. There we go. No cow's dairy of any kind. You see a little sheep's milk or you see a little bit of goat's milk, but none of the sort of yogurts or milk that we drink. And when it comes to what they're drinking 6 glasses of water a day, some tea, coffee, and then a little bit of wine, usually with meals. Not a lot of wine, but a little bit of red wine helps the nutrition absorption of their Mediterranean diet. This is what centenarians want to. So you may get involved in all these fad diets, but if you want to know what people around the world are eating to live to be 100, this is what they're doing. And it's not just about what they eat, it's what they don't eat. They have strategies to keep from overeating. They eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper. They eat all of their calories in an 8-hour window. They eat with their family. They don't have electronics in their kitchen, so they're mindlessly eating. They sit down, they say a prayer, they eat their food, talk to their family, and finish. And when it comes to about 50% of the longevity formula, it's how they connect. They keep their aging parents nearby. They invest in their spouse and in their children, and they make family a priority. They tend to belong to a faith. We know that people who belong to a faith live 4 to 14 years longer than people who don't. And they pay a lot of attention to who they're socializing with. And this is huge. We now know that if your 3 best friends are unhealthy and obese, there's a 150% better chance that you'll be overweight yourself. My grandmother used to tell me, show me your friends and I'll tell you your future. This is very much the case with Blue Zones. People surround themselves with people whose idea of recreation is walking or gardening. They surround themselves with vegetarians, so they're influenced to eat plant-based. They're surrounded by people who care about them and they can have a meaningful conversation. This is all contagious. So people look at this pyramid and they say, well, this sounds like common sense. It's not common sense. Fewer than 5% of Americans do anything like this. Instead, in the United States, and increasingly, I can tell other parts of the world, we turn to diets, supplements, and exercise programs for our health. And by the way, they're not a bad idea. They make sense. They cost a lot of money. In America, we spend over $100 billion on these programs. And while occasionally their successes in the short run, they are universally failures in the long run. So let's just say I got everybody in this auditorium to get on the Blue Zone diet, 100% of you. I would lose 10% of you in the first 3 months, and I'd lose a full 90% of you in the first 7 months. Our brains are hardwired for novelty. We get bored, we run out of discipline. And within 2 years, you lose 98% of people who start a diet. Good idea in the short run, universally failures in the long run. Same thing with exercise programs. You get 100 people on an exercise program today, you're going to lose about 90% of them within the first year and about 95% of them within 3 years. And even if I come back from the Blue Zones with a supplement guaranteed to help people live longer, Americans anyway wouldn't take the pill for long enough to make a difference. We get bored. So if that doesn't work, what does? There's very clear lessons from the Blue Zones. In Blue Zones, people are eating a plant-based diet and they're moving every 20 minutes because their life is underpinned with purpose. They're surrounded by the right group of friends and they live in a community where the healthy choice is the easy choice. And the real secret of this is not necessarily the circles, it's these lines. It's the mutually supporting connections that help people do the right things for long enough and avoid the wrong things for long enough so they don't develop heart disease and cancer and diabetes and dementia, the things that are killing us. I'd like to do a little demonstration right now. So before I came here, I looked into the longevity of Russia. Russia's not a blue zone. Life expectancy here is just over 71 years. Men only live 66 years. There are places in poor parts of Africa that do better than Russia. And please don't take this as a criticism. I love your country. I feel like I'm one of your sons and one of your brothers. I've had the opportunity to live among you for 6 of the most wonderful months of my life, but you're way down there. As a little demonstration, I would like everybody in this quadrant here to stand up. Just you people, I'm going to come down, stand up. Just in this area right here, please stand up. And look at everybody else. So if this whole auditorium were Russia, this would about represent the proportion of people who die every year from smoking. These people don't have to die, but because almost 60% of men and 40% of women in this country smoke, that's how many people die. You can go ahead and sit down. Thank you very much. Now, I would like everybody from right here over to stand up. Everybody over here, stand up. Stand up. Even way in the back, come on, stand up. You'll enjoy the movie naturally. All the way back, stand up. Stand up. Just on this side. Okay, and look around each other. This represents the number of people this year who will die needlessly from alcohol consumption. You guys drink a lot. You're a lot of fun, and since 1990, the amount of alcohol you drink has tripled, but people are dying needlessly. Okay, sit down, thank you, I didn't mean to pick on you. Now, I want everybody from right here over to stand up. Everybody from here over to, all the way in the back, stand up. All the way in the back, everybody from here over, stand up. You guys stand up again. Stand up. It'll be good for your longevity. Stand up. This represents the number of people in Russia who will die this year needlessly from cardiovascular disease. That means strokes, heart attacks, artery clogging. Most of these people don't have to die. Only about 3% of these people have to die, but that's how many people die needlessly. You guys can sit down again. Thank you for allowing that illustration. So, most of the diseases that are killing Russians are completely avoidable. And what I'd like to do now for the second part of my presentation is quickly give you some ideas on what Russia could be doing, or Moscow specifically, to avoid the needless death we're seeing in this country. And this has been proven in other cities. So if you go not too far from here, Karelia, Russia, it's in the north, but there's a sister region in Finland called North Karelia, 150,000 people. It had the highest rate of cardiovascular disease in the world in 1972, and they did something about it. And over that 30 years, because of this project in North Karelia, not in the Russian part, only in the Finnish part of Karelia, they managed to drop heart disease by 80% and a lot of the gastrointestinal tract cancers that prematurely kill people by about 60%. How did they do it? Well, they did it in a very Blue Zone way. They changed the environment. So for National Geographic, I traveled to North Karelia. I took what I learned from Blue Zones, went to North Karelia, a place that reversed diseases that unnecessarily kill people, and developed a model for cities. So the first thing you have to realize is that individuals, everybody in this auditorium, myself included, we are genetically, evolutionarily hardwired to crave fat and pork and cheese and sugar and salt and take rest whenever we can. That's how we survived as a species, because we'd eat a lot, and then there would be times of scarcity. The problem is, though we evolved in times of scarcity and hardships, we now live in a time of abundance and excess and ease. So our genes are not serving us well. So instead of educating the individual and asking the individual to change his behaviors and change his habits, or tell that individual, you're bad, It's your individual responsibility to change your habits. We basically forget the individual, and we just assume that that individual spends most of his life or her life in an area about 30 kilometers long. This is that we call it a life radius, 30 kilometers, where they spend most of their life. Most Russians don't go far from home for most of their life. 80% or so will stay near. And we try to optimize the environment. How do you do that? Well, it turns out the most cost-effective way is with policy. So basically boils down to this. Do you live in a city where the cheapest and most accessible foods are hamburgers, chips, sodas? Or do you live in a city where the cheapest and most accessible foods are vegetables and fruits and beans and nuts? A lot of this is governed by taxes, it's governed by availability, and it's governed by what we supplement. Do you live in a city where tobacco smoking is very easy and cheap, or in a city where it is inconvenient and expensive? A low-hanging fruit for this country is diminishing the smoking rate. There are very easy playbooks that have been used in Denmark and the United States that have lowered smoking to rates of about 1/5. You see here in Russia. So all those people, these nice people sitting here, they don't really need to die. That's governed by policy. Second thing, built environment. You can raise the physical activity level of an entire population, 12 million people in Moscow, by just making streets walkable, bikeable, making sure there are green spaces, and making it easy to take public transportation. I've only been here a day, but I already know that traffic's a nightmare here. That is a choice. It doesn't have to be that way. There are places like the Netherlands and Copenhagen that have made the conscious decision to build, this is important, to build streets for human beings and not just cars. If you make driving inconvenient, people will get out of their cars and onto their feet, physical activity rates will go up, and obesity rates will go down, and people live a less stressful life and safer lives because they're not exposed to dangerous cars and the fumes they create. Remember, I'm showing you a model that we actually did. This is not fictional. It turns out that in every community, about 80% of people want to change their health. You don't have 80% of people actually do anything, but they have the desire. That's contagious. So if you can just put people together who want to change their health and challenge them to either walk or eat together, plant-based. Then for restaurants, grocery stores, workplaces, schools, and churches, there's about 150 policies and design changes that you can put in place to take out or engineer out about 300 calories of mindless eating and engineer back in about 300 calories of mindless physical activity. Remember, this doesn't depend on people's discipline. It's changing the environment. And then finally, if you can help people find their sense of purpose and an outlet for that purpose, I don't know if you saw Jennifer's presentation right before here, but most people don't like their jobs. Most people go to work because they need money. Probably about 70 or 80% in this country. But there is one outlet for your purpose that's available to everybody, and that's volunteering. Volunteers have lower rates of heart disease, they have lower weight, they report more happiness in every country in the world, and they have measurably lower healthcare costs. So the simple act of getting people connected to a volunteer opportunity just for a while, because it turns out that philanthropy and altruism is addictive. It stimulates the same neurotransmitters as sugar and crack cocaine. So you just give people a little taste of volunteering and it sticks. So can this work? 10 years ago, I brought this idea to 5 cities, 5 little cities in Minnesota where I'm from. You can think of Minnesota as the Siberia of the United States. It's cold there, it's out in the middle of nowhere. And I auditioned 5 cities. I didn't say you get this automatically. I went to the mayor, the city council, the chamber of commerce, the superintendent of schools, the CEOs of the biggest corporations, and I said, here's a model of what we want to do to a city. We can only do it to one city. Show us you're ready. Show us you want this. And one city, 20,000 people, called Albert Lea, Minnesota, not only said yes, everybody said they'll do it. They signed a pledge. Everybody in the city signed a pledge. They gave us also 120 volunteers, and we went to work. So this is Albert Lea, Minnesota, 20,000 people. The first thing we did was listen. Rather than thinking we know everything, we listened to all the organizations that are trying to nudge people into moving more, eating more plant-based, living out their purpose. Then we got them all feet in the same direction. And then we measured. We used a tool called the Gallup Well-Being Index that measures the weight of people, the well-being, basically the health and wellness of people. And that for all organizations participating, if we could improve health measurably, then everybody can take credit. Then we went to work. So it turns out that Albert Lea, this small city, had 4 neighborhoods, essentially 4 quadrants. And then this beautiful downtown, but you couldn't walk to downtown because there weren't sidewalks. So we just convinced every neighborhood to create one sidewalk to downtown so that at least anybody who wanted to walk downtown, we made it easy for them to walk downtown. And downtown was beautiful. I mean, people sat outside and ate lunch together, and there were churches and stores. But a parent is never going to let their kid go downtown if they have to walk through dangerous traffic. And an older person's not going to walk downtown if they have to cut through a field. So just creating 5 kilometers of sidewalks, you create a vector for everybody to get downtown. And then at the end of the city, there was this beautiful lake, but there was no way to get around it. So we just convinced them to spend a little bit of money to make sure there was a trail around the lake. It was easy, it was beautiful, and now that trail is full every day of the year. I don't have to give people a free t-shirt. I don't have to beg them to do it. I don't have to guilt them into do it. I just create a beautiful area for them to walk and recreate, and they do it anyway. I created these throughout Albert Lea. There were these beautiful parks, but most of it was just sitting open. We convinced them to create 4 public gardens so that people could go out. You know, we didn't have dachas, but this was our attempt at dachas. They immediately filled up. We created a Blue Zone certification for all of the restaurants. I don't know if you have this practice here in Russia, but when you go into an American restaurant, they automatically give you bread and butter. Well, it turns out if bread and butter don't show up in front of you, you don't miss it. You don't need that extra 150 calories. So in Blue Zone certified restaurants, you could still get the bread and butter, but you change the default so that people have to ask for it. And it turns out most people don't ask for it, and it turns out the restaurant owner saves money on food costs. Instead of automatically getting a French fries with a sandwich, in a Blue Zone certified restaurant, you automatically got fruit, but you could ask for the French fries. We changed the adjectives on menus. Do you know the adjective that most assures that people will not order an entree in a restaurant? It's the healthy choice. Let me tell you that nobody wants the damn healthy choice. When people go out to eat, they want to eat something delicious. So you change it from the healthy choice to the Italian Primavera salad, same ingredients, you increase the sales by 30%. In stores, we made sure that the healthy food was easy to see. There was a checkout aisle so that after you've been shopping, when you're hungry, instead of looking at candy bars and sodas, all of the things that were offered at the cash register were healthy. Nuts, magazines, fresh fruit, water. In schools, we changed a few very easy policies. We didn't try to tackle school lunch. It's too politically charged in America. But one simple thing reduces the weight of school children by 11%. and it cost $0. You simply change a policy in schools where there's no eating in hall rooms and classrooms. That simple policy change cuts out 8 hours of junk food eating, and children's weight goes down. We got all schools to agree to that. We got 25% of the population to take a Blue Zone pledge, take a test, got them to agree to put a garden in their backyard, to join connected social circles like those old Okinawan women. We just put 4 or 5 people together and challenged them to walk together for 10 weeks to create new friendships. We gave everybody a purpose workshop. It's so rare that somebody sits down with people who live in the middle of our country and actually see what they love to do, what they're good at, and what an outlet for their purpose is. And we did that for them. And then we quickly connected them to volunteer opportunities. So what are the results? After just 2 years, life expectancy went up by over 3 years. We cut off more than 3,000 kilos of weight for the whole city, and healthcare costs dropped by 40%. And this created big news in the United States. It was big national news, not because we tried to convince everybody to change their behavior. It was because we changed the environment. And once you change the environment, then behavior changes naturally. You begin changing the culture by beginning with changing the environment. That's the big idea here. From here, we auditioned 55 more cities. We picked 3 municipalities in Los Angeles, California. A very different culture, very different mindset, but it was the same approach. Here, everybody drives. You know, it's traffic way worse than Moscow. We sat down with the city planners, and we helped them imagine a new city. So if you want to get voters to vote to change, vote for a healthier city, you have to show them. So we brought the mayor, the newspaper, the head of the Chamber of Commerce, and we walked them through Los Angeles, the streets, and then we took them back in a room and we showed them what Los Angeles could look like if you change the environment. There we go. It's a lot easier to get people to, what would you rather live in, this or the previous slide? It's a lot easier to get the political support when people can see what you're talking about. When we arrived in Los Angeles, 0% of children walked to school. Why? Because parents are afraid their children is going to get hit by a car or a kidnapper is going to snatch them. We created walking school buses where we got old people from retirement homes, did a background check, and got them to lead groups of children to walk to school. Now we have 30% of these kids walking to school. In Los Angeles, 40%, get this, 40% of these kids could not correctly identify a banana as a fruit. So we made sure in the curriculum for first graders, 6-year-olds, that they were taught what fruits are, what vegetables are. They could identify them. They had a chance to taste them. In the lunchroom, we made sure fruits and vegetables were the first thing in the line, so they were more likely to take them than to move on to pizza or the other junk food. And then because we were competing with the McDonald's right outside, we got the lunch ladies to take baked potatoes and fruit and make it look like junk food. And then kids would eat it. But this was healthy. And then we worked with city council and showed them policy menus. They adopted a policy that there was no junk food 1,000 meters from schools. We convinced them to create a no smoking in all 3 of the cities we worked in, and not only pass the law, but actually enforce no smoking. But the result was amazing. In 5 years, smoking went down by 17%, The weight of people went down 15%. That means 1,900 fewer obese people. Stress scores went down by 9%. Physical activity up by 9%. And thriving, it's a measure of happiness, went up by 12%. This was only in this city, by the way. It wasn't in other California cities. It was only in the cities that we worked with. So that caught more attention. We went from a city of 150,000. The whole state of Iowa, which is known as the pork state, hired us to change their, back again on the prairies of the Midwest. Sorry, this clicker is jumping around on me. And then from the state of Iowa down to 15 cities, down to Fort Worth, Texas, 1 million people. This is a city of 1 million. Fort Worth, Texas brought us in. I had to hire 30 full-time people, but we did the same thing. We convinced beef restaurants to make sure that they ordered at least 3 plant-based entrees. I don't know if you have these in Moscow, but we call them food deserts, where for more than 3 kilometers you can't get to healthy food. We made sure that there was at least one area in that store where they could get healthy fruits and vegetables, and it turns out that it was not only did people want it, but that it turned out it was good business. People actually would order it if it was there. And then we got them to go no smoking in bars and restaurants. The smokers hated us, but on the other hand, over the course of the 3 years we were there, we had a 13% drop in smoking, 7% drop in obesity, and this is where the rubber hit the road. We saved them $250 million. So once you can show this level of success, your phone starts ringing, and right now we are in about 28 American cities throughout the United States using this evidence-based program, and now we can just scale. And I now have a team of 200 full-time employees, and we're paid not by the city, but we're paid by insurance companies when we actually lower healthcare costs. So I don't have to tell you guys there's a big health problem in this country. Well over half of Russians are dying needlessly from cardiovascular disease. Another 20% are dying needlessly of cancer. You know, vegans, by the way, don't die of heart disease. It's completely lifestyle driven. For the first time in living history, life expectancy of our children will be less than our own life expectancy. Is that because we're stupid? Or we lack discipline? Or we love our children less than our parents loved us? No. The environment is changed. And Russia, by the way, has a huge opportunity right now. You do not have to make the mistakes that we have made in the United States. We have let the fast food industry completely take over our cities. You cannot drive to a store or take your kids to school without going through a corridor of pizzas and hamburgers and soda pops and chips. Discipline's a good thing. Individual responsibility is a good thing, but you cannot ask people to make the healthy choice when 98 out of 100 choices are bad. Eventually, your genes are going to win. The secret to longevity, whether it's in our lives, in our families, or in our workplaces, lies in shifting the focus away from thinking, deluding ourselves that we're going to get 12 million people from Moscow to change their behavior for the next 30 years. It's never going to happen. But what we can do is change the environment, making the healthy choice not only the easy choice, but making it the unavoidable choice. And you have to think systematically. Our homes, our schools, our workplaces, our grocery stores, and with city policy. I want to finish with that old guy from Ikaria. Remember the guy with the bad clothes on who forgot to die? I actually called him a few months ago. I was writing about him, and I was asking him questions about his daily lifestyle. He speaks perfect English. And after about 20 minutes, he said, "You got to hurry this up. I got friends coming over for happy hour." And I said, "Okay, I just have one last question. Did you ever figure out how you got rid of lung cancer?" And he said, "Yeah, I gave that a lot of thought." He said, "I flew back to the United States about 15 years ago to get some tests." And I said, "Yeah, what did you discover?" He said, "Nothing. When I got back to the United States, all my doctors were dead." Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. So before I take questions, I want to introduce you to a great Russian hero, Alexander Razumenko, who bicycled around the world with me, a great scientist. He's from Novosibirsk. I have not seen him in 29 years. Alexander, would you please stand up? This is my partner who holds the world record for bicycling across Russia. Thank you, Alexander.
So thank you, Mr. Ben. And now we're gonna have a Q&A session, isn't it? Yeah?
Sure. Ooh, I'm gonna put my headphones on.
Дорогие друзья, сейчас мы, как и договаривались,
Dear friends, we are going to have a questions and answers session. Please take a microphone to ask your question, so you are encouraged to ask questions, and then we'll take your questions immediately at the Forum of Social Innovations. Please, your questions. Hello, thank you so much from all my heart for your outstanding speech. It was wonderful. So I wish you the happiest and longest life. I'm sure this is what I'm going to have. I have two questions. Question number one is about the zones, about the blue zones. If I'm not mistaken, I listened to you very attentively and took notes. You left 3 blue zones unnamed. What are those zones, briefly? What zones you have not mentioned? And question number 2. Well, I'm sure you talked about different things with long livers. What do wives and children of long livers think, of male long livers think about them?
The 5 blue zones are Okinawa, Japan, Sardinia, Italy, Nicoya, Costa Rica, the Seventh-day Adventist, and Ikaria, Greece. People used to think, by the way, it was the Caucasus of Georgia, but that was mistaken because it turns out people there were lying about their age. They had their birth certificates changed during the time of Stalin to make them look much older so they weren't recruited into the army and never went back and changed. So, okay, what do the wives and children think of long-lived men? Well, first of all, for every 1 male centenarian, there's 5 female centenarians. So women are much better at living a long time than men. But it turns out that when it comes to living a long time, women are much better for men than men are for women. So staying married, when a wife dies, the man dies very quickly. But when the husband dies, the wife lives on just fine. So there's your answer. And thank you, by the way, for the very nice question.
Thank you. And what about relationships between men and women and children? How do children and wives of long-living men, what is the relationship between them, and what gives long-living males health and longevity?
It's pretty clear in
Как
Sardinia.
надо относиться к жене, ребенку?
So what should wives and children do to make a man live longer, in other words?
The women should stay married to their men to live longer. In Sardinia, it was very clear that women bear most of the stress. So while the Sardinian men are out with their sheep, the females are taking care of children, repairing the roof, taking care of finances. So men owe women a deep debt of gratitude for helping them live a long time. Men do not do much for women. And as I pointed out, for men especially, it's important to have daughters. One of the best ways to live a long time in Sardinia is have lots of daughters and be nice to them.
Дорогие друзья, у нас остается не так много времени, поэтому давайте...
Dear friends, we do not have much time. Let each of you, or those who want, ask only one question, not two. Thank you.
Здравствуйте, меня зовут.
My name is Yana. Well, thank you so much for your presentation. It was my greatest joy to listen to you live. I also research longevity from the brain point of view, and I'll explain why. That's why I'm so happy to have you here in Moscow and in Russia. So, you know, in Russia we dream about things, draw dream maps, etc. It has become very popular. So I have drawn my dream, and my dream was to discuss longevity and internal life with you. I have no question. It was just a comment, and I wanted to express my appreciation for you.
Честно, это для меня была это несбыточная.
Well, I thought my dream would never come true. Just to get a visa to the United States, it's a big problem now. So I knew it would take a lot of effort. It's like flying to the moon, you know? So the fact that you are here, you made my dream come true. So I'm overwhelmed by emotions. Thank you for your wonderful lecture.
Да, действительно, мы здесь исполняем мечты.
Yes, thank you. The next question.
Thank you. I hope we'll talk after.
Yes, hello, Dan. Hello. Oh, by the way, your birthday was a couple of days before, yeah?
Yes,
Yes, happy birthday to you.
Thank you. I'm 104.
Yes, almost, almost. You are a great guy. Thank you so much. My name is Alex Kocherga. I'm from Moscow. You know, my question is, how looks like your usual day from the blue zone? Which the most important habits did you have? What you bring from all this traveling around the world, and what is your usual day looks like? I mean, what you usually eat? Maybe something special. Yeah, okay, something advices from you. Thank you.
Great question. So, I live what I think is a blue zone life. First of all, I don't believe in any superfoods. The foods that will make you live longer are simple foods. Go to a dacha in Novosibirsk and watch how they eat on the weekend, and that is a diet of longevity. I start my day eating beans and vegetables, maybe some oatmeal. I take a walk in the morning, gentle, low-intensity physical activity. I have lunch. I always eat plant-based. I take a nap. At 5 o'clock, I have happy hour with somebody special. I go out to dinner, and then I make sure to get 8 hours of sleep. That's my Blue Zone's life.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So you have discovered the secrets of how to live long. I'm 83 years old, and I'm sure I will live till 100 years old. And here is my question. when the person gets old, he or she loses the beauty of the face in the first place. Do you have a secret of how to preserve the beauty of your face when you get older?
I'm not necessarily a good judge of male beauty, but I would say you're a very handsome gentleman. But so there's a few things. As you get older, your definition of beauty changes. And also, by the way, after about age 55, between age 50 and 55 are the least happy years of our lives. And as long as you maintain your health, happiness continues to increase into your 100s. So at a certain point, it's more about satisfaction. Beauty isn't as important as what is on the inside as you reach your 70s, 80s, 90s, and 100s. So you have nothing to worry about, sir.
Спасибо большое за ответ. Следующий вопрос.
Thank you. Next question. Good afternoon. Dan, I'm Olesya. You've touched upon one of very important topics, happiness. It affects its longevity, his longevity. You mentioned volunteer movement. Do you have projects in Russia? What kind of cities, and is it possible to take part in these projects?
When it comes to happiness, if you are among the 20% who are the happiest in a population, you live about 6 years longer than the 20% that are the least happy. So yes, happiness and longevity go hand in hand. This is the first time I've been back to Russia in 29 years, and I am honored and delighted to be invited here. And any city that wants to become a Blue Zone, they can call me. So, by the way, I didn't put my email up, but if anybody wants to email me, it's very easy. My name is Dan. My book is Blue Zones, so email me at dan@bluezones.com. And if you want your city to become a Blue Zone, let's talk.
Thank you very much.
Spasiba.
Thank you. Thank you. Next question. I'm Margarita. At what time a human being should have a rest? How does your daily schedule affects you? Because you mentioned that in Blue Zones people wake up at 5:30, and when they go to sleep. And what is your daily schedule?
First, talk about so my expertise is what the longest lived people in the world do. And I can tell you, in places where people live a long time, they're going to bed soon after sunset, and they're waking up soon before sunrise. And sometimes they have 2 sleeps. In Nicoya, for example, it's very common for them to go to bed at 7, wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning and do a little bit of housework or read the Bible, and then go back to sleep until just before sunrise. But on average, centenarians, most of their life, they've been sleeping 8 hours. So most of us are deluded into thinking we can get by with less sleep, but as human beings, the best amount of sleep is between 8 and 9 hours, and most people should strive to get that. Thank you for your question.
Спасибо. Переходим к следующему вопросу.
Thank you. Next question. Good afternoon. I am Roman. I'm from Siberia. You said that Blue Zone, it's not only a lifestyle but a place where human being is living. And what shall we do, those who live in industrial cities? I live in an industrial city. If I stick to all the principles which you have mentioned, but if I don't change the place where I live, whether it will be important, I mean the place where you live, is it important for a Blue Zone or not?
Unfortunately, yes. Where you live is probably the biggest driver of your life expectancy. I can tell you in the United States, there are cities in the United States where the life expectancy is 20 years lower than other cities, like Boulder, Colorado, or San Luis Obispo. So the level of pollution in your city, the level of traffic in your city, the level of stress, that will drive your longevity. From my time in Siberia 20 years ago, I observed a few wonderful practices that at the end of the week, at least during the warm months, people would take a bus out and live in their dacha. And what I love about, and I hope this tradition of dacha survives into the next generations, because it's the perfect Blue Zone activity. First of all, you stay physically active with low-intensity physical activity. They're very social. You end up meeting the people who are working their gardens around you, and you emerge from the activity with fruits and vegetables that you're going to eat. So I think the more that we can preserve that tradition. I would also say, though, there's a little bit too much enthusiasm in this country around meat. Fatback, slava, pork, and beef. These are things that we know for sure add to chronic disease. So the extent to which you can change your immediate environment or social circle so you're not eating those, that's probably the best you can do. Or if you don't live in a healthy place, maybe you can move.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Спасибо большое за ваш вопрос.
Thank you. Next question.
And I have a question. You told that you had a task to find a Blue Zone in the United States. How do you think, is there any opportunity to find additional Blue Zones in the world and maybe one in Russia?
So, good question, Olga. I'm still looking for Blue Zones, but I think Blue Zone is a disappearing phenomena. The problem is globalization and quite honestly, the terrible American food culture is destroying these traditional ways of living just about everywhere in the world, even far reaches of Southeast Asia, even in Africa, even in Latin America. There may be one more Blue Zone. I believe it's in Latin America, but I think that's it. What's important, though, is, we've been doing this 15 years, and we now know clearly the blueprint that yields healthier populations. And I think it's less about trying to find more, because I think it's going to be the same thing over again, and implementing what we already know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Olga.
Спасибо за вопрос. Дорогие друзья, у нас осталось...
Well, dear friends, we don't have enough time. We have time for 2 more questions. And all other questions you will be able to email him and to get his answer directly by mail.
Nice to meet you.
Oh, nice to meet you.
Я лидер общественного...
I am a leader of a social organization, Ladies of Yakutia, Outer Ladies of Yakutia. Back in 2003, we traveled from Yakutsk to Yakutsk around the world. From Yakutsk to Yakutsk. We traveled by car. I wrote a book about this journey. This is my diary, 80 days, the title is. And I invite you to come to Yakutia. I can help you to travel all over Yakutia in all 36 districts. I've been there in all 36 districts of Yakutia. And I believe that Yakutia is the best place for travelers, the best place in the world. So please come and visit us.
Thank you very much. And by the way, when we bicycled around the world, we stopped in Irkutsk. Thank you very much. Email me. Yes.
Спасибо большое. Да, дорогие друзья.
Thank you. Yes, you can email Dan and organize any journey around the world. One more question. Good afternoon, Dan. I'm Alexander. I'm from Moscow. My parents, they love dacha, as you say. They are 80-year-old and they live in dacha. When they come to Moscow, they don't feel good. When I listened to you, I understood that all Blue Zones which you have discovered, they are located in clean areas. Can you imagine that you can imagine that here we have a mayor of Moscow among us. What shall we do in Moscow in order to create the Blue Zone in Moscow, or at least to start creating Blue Zone in Moscow?
The translator stopped.
What should the government do to make this?
What shall we do to make Moscow blue zone, a blue zone? Imagine that.
But I was sad to see the very first thing when I got in the airport of Moscow was an advertisement for McDonald's. I don't like to talk, I don't think McDonald's is a bad company, but I just hope that the fast foods don't displace the traditional foods of Russia. And number two, you have a very good architect here in Sergei, in Moscow. His name is Sergei. I met him yesterday. To the extent that, and he has the right idea about changing the environment, to the extent that you can reach the mayor of Moscow and empower Sergei to design streets for human beings, it'll be the first best step you can do, I think, for longevity and for happiness of this city. So I'd like to close. I know that was the last question. I'm here, and I'll be around, so I would love, please, if you see me, please come talk to me. I'd love to come meet you. We absolutely have to answer her question, the little girl. Let's, one more question.
Okay, just one more question.
A cute little girl with ponytails and a green dress. It was about 5.
Hello.
Hello.
I'd like to give you a little plane. I want to give you a little plane. A little plane. Made of paper. Can you hear me? Yes.
Please come up. Look at it. I love this. Oh my God. This is the happiest I've been. Thank you.
So,
it's very nice to meet you. So,
thank you so much, Dan, first of all, for being here and for sharing your great experience. And you know, I heard the wonderful phrase which you said, which sounds like to forget to die, isn't it?
Yes.
And I want to wish for every one of us to forget to die and live 100+ long, happy lives. And you know, Russia is a very friendly country, and right now we want to congratulate you with your birthday together, and this song is for you.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, happy birthday. Happy birthday to you.
Happy birthday, Mr. Dan Buettner. This applause is for you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Дорогие друзья, спасибо большое. Это был Дэн Бютнер. Вы сегодня еще можете увидеть его.
Buettner. You will see him at 6 in the meeting room Dawn.
В нескольких залах нашего павильона, вы также можете все их посетить. Те из вас, кто не планирует больше возвращаться в зал Москва, напоминаю, что устройство синхронного перевода нужно сдать на выходе из зала. Те же, кто планирует остаться, вы можете оставаться на своих местах. Ровно через полчаса у нас начнется следующая лекция, следующая встреча. Напомню, что в зале «Амур», где поднимаются вопросы здравоохранения, начнется дискуссия под названием «Жизнь до конца жизни. Паллиативная медицина как право на качественную жизнь». В зале «Волга» продолжают говорить об образовании, и тема следующей дискуссии звучит как «Выгодно ли бизнесу инвестировать в образование?». Вопросы саморазвития также обсуждают в зале «Дон». Там поднимается тема образования для людей серебряного возраста. В дискуссии принимают участие ректор МГПУ Игорь Римаренко, ректор РГСУ Наталья Починок и другие эксперты. В зале «Енисей» обсуждают, можно ли создать условия для счастья в любой профессиональной сфере. Что могут делать работодатели, чтобы их сотрудники находили смысл в своей работе и чувствовали себя счастливыми? Тема звучит следующим образом. Инфраструктура счастья в организации, реалии и управление ожиданиями сотрудников. В зале Печора выступит еще один иностранный гость форума – всемирно известный геронтолог Обри де Грей. Теория долголетия Обри де Грея «Как в ближайшие годы мы победим старение». В продолжение предыдущего лектора. А в нашем зале ровно в 16 часов выступит знаменитый психолог Андрей Курпатов, президент Высшей школы методологии, научный руководитель лаборатории нейронаук и поведения человека Сбербанка. Тема его выступления звучит очень интригующе. Все, что нужно знать о счастье. Переосмысление психологии. Ждем вас ровно в 16 часов здесь, в зале Москва. Спасибо, до скорой встречи.